Today we're going to be talking about detention warehouses. ICE has identified 23 different spots where they want to cram people into industrial warehouses. I've found a bunch where the communities have effectively pushed back. And so I'd like to go over how they did that and how people can find if one of these are in their areas as well. I'm Cameron Stevenson, the national correspondent for Courier Newsroom, and I also write a weekly column called Below the Beltway on Substack.
And I'm Mason. I'm a progressive live streamer known One Hand Politics everywhere on the internet. And I'm really excited to go over this issue.
So a couple weeks ago, I got a tip from someone that ICE was considering buying a warehouse in Salt Lake City, Utah, which I've been in Salt Lake before, spent some time there. It's their industrial sector isn't really built for residential. And the detention center that I was told about was supposed to be massive. It was going to hold 7,500 people, which is about 30% bigger than the current largest detention center in the United States. We're talking, again, not to invoke the Nazis, but Nazi Germany style camps in the United States. From there, I was able to kind of take a step back and found some previous reporting by the Washington Post where they had broadly identified a series of locations where ICE wanted to rent out these warehouses, but they hadn't listed the specifics. And in fact, I found in a few instances, they got the locations wrong. And so I went through, I found a leaked copy of the list of all 23 locations and was able to correctly identify them, alerted some local municipalities, and found a few where they actually have been able to stop these facilities from being bought by ICE.
Is the current largest detention center Alligator Alcatraz in Florida?
Uh, that one's pretty big, and it is pretty inhumane, but it's not the biggest. The largest one is in Fort Bliss, and I believe it holds just over around 5,000 people.
Jeez, yeah. To double down on that and make an even larger detention center, when we already have a detention center in Texas that is separating people by color, that I know a lot of people have been talking about after there was, I think, drone footage that was released of children and women in that detention center, and then a medieval style alligator moat in Florida to double down on both of those and make an even more inhumane detention center. Crazy to see. Correct me if I'm wrong. The
Yeah.
governor has condemned this potential build, right?
Yes, yeah. In Salt Lake City, this specific one, the governor, the city councilors, and the people in Salt Lake began protesting so much that they effectively were able to pressure the owners of the warehouse to
Mm.
reject ICE and say, "Nope, we're not making any deals with the federal government. We're part of the community, and we respond to what the community wants." So that was pretty effective. And to your point on just the sheer size of these places, it's not just that they're these detention facilities, right? These are industrial grade warehouses. They are not fit for residential use. They're not fit for people to live in. In a lot of cases, they aren't outfitted with basic necessities like sewage, water, air conditioning. These are factories to build things to work in, to temporarily be in, but to live in would honestly just be a death sentence.
And I can't imagine the insulation issues, like when there's heavy weather that's there. I mean, we know Salt Lake City gets pretty bad winters. And while we're leaving that season, I mean, I don't anticipate the Trump administration using this temporarily. It seems like it'd be a year-round thing, which is wild.
Yeah, no, I mean, in a lot of these instances, they're multi-year leases they're seeking. They want to have these
Mm.
places for a long time. They actually did sign a lease in Surprise, Arizona, which is just a suburb of Phoenix. I believe it's going to hold 1,500 people is their plan. But Surprise gets into the, I believe, 120 degrees in the summer for months.
Jeez.
And I've lived in Arizona. I've been in warehouses out there. They aren't insulated. They aren't built for people to be in for a long. Even people working there need to take breaks from being inside because it's so, ugh, it just gets hot, gets muggy, and then the conditions that they set up in there is just it's untenable.
Yeah, I mean, we already know that they're not even allowing congressional members to oversee what these conditions look like in detention centers. There's no accountability for what it is that they're doing inside. Um, and to treat that as, you know, we were able to cookie cutter copy this across the country, especially in somewhere like Utah, which is great that there's public pressure, but we know overall as a majority red state, we'd want to see city officials, state officials, legislators actually be able to make sure that their constituents are not being tortured in these concentration camps, essentially.
Yeah. Well, and what we're seeing, or what I've found as I've looked through these 23 different locations, is that the opposition is universal. There's another community in it's called Circle City, Georgia. It's a small town of about 5,000 people,
Mm,
and ICE is looking into getting a warehouse there that would house 10,000 people. Now, this is Trump country. It went for Trump. They are, in concept supportive of his anti-immigration efforts, but I guess it's more of a NIMBY style thing where they just don't want it in their backyard. The mayor there has said this will triple our population, and if you say it's the worst of the worst criminals, which it's not, but that's what they believe because the Trump administration says so, we don't want this prison built here. We don't have, like, there's not enough water for everyone. There's not enough
yeah.
sewage services. Like, this will be inhumane. There's nothing we can do about it. And so the Republicans there are working with their Democratic Senator, John Ossoff, to stop this facility from going into place.
And I imagine a lot of that too is understanding what public pressure will look like. I mean, people across the country have made it clear that their opposition to the torturing of migrants and US civilians alike will not be tolerated. And I think even people that are outside of, rural places in Georgia will be willing to travel and commute there in order to make their opposition heard. I'm sure even the local government that might be in favor, quote unquote, of the philosophy, it's yes, the infrastructure costs and the costs on the population growing overall, but also they don't want these protesters coming in. And I think that that's a good thing and shows what public pressure is able to do. It really speaks to the power of collective organization and these mass mobilization movements we've seen.
Yeah, well, and that's why a few of these have these deals have not gone through. There was one that was proposed in Minnesota, and I mean, everyone in Minnesota basically, like, just viscerally hates ICE right now because they are on a murderous warpath in their state. There was so much opposition that that one got shut down. The one in Salt Lake City got shut down. There was another one, warehouse proposed in Oklahoma, and people were so against it that that one's not happening anymore. And even in Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri, this one's interesting. I talked to one of the county legislators there, is that they have actually been able to effectively use legislation to stop an ICE facility from going into effect there.
Wow.
Yeah.
What
And, and
what what was it that they passed?
yeah, so what they did, and it's really interesting because, again, this is Missouri. It's
Yeah.
largely a Trump place, but Kansas City is fairly progressive. Jackson County, where Kansas City resides, has a lot of autonomy in how they operate. And so what they did is they passed a 5-year moratorium on any non-locally owned detention facility. So what they
Mm.
said is, for the next 5 years, no one can open, like, a jail, a prison, a detention, anything for 5 years unless it's the city that does it or the county, effectively stopping a federal, building from opening up in their county.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the most wild parts of a lot of these detention centers is just lack of medical access as well. Like,
Yeah.
we know that people who need life-saving drugs are not being properly administered that. And when you're seeing the conditions of people are detained, brought to this place, forced to strip down in front of each other, regardless of what crime they've committed. In most instances, there's no crime. I mean, we see reporting from New York Times that says over 70% of people who are detained have no criminal record, and yet they're still forced to go through these conditions that we don't even suggest or subject U.S. prisoners to in some cases, as far as just like the public displays of humiliation of making them undress in front of each other and use the restroom in front of each other. There was a woman who said she was on her menstrual cycle who was not given any feminine products until 2 weeks after she was detained, which is wild to me. I don't understand how any community can support this as something that is beneficial to the population there.
Yeah. Well, and as more people are made aware of the circumstances in these centers, the more people are against it because, even for people who have committed some sort of criminal offense, these punishments don't fit any of the crime. First of all, nobody should be given a punishment without having their day in court.
Yeah.
And then most of the people who are committing these, any crimes are misdemeanors. For anyone else, that's a ticket. But for them, it's months and months of incarceration where they're humiliated. They're forced to use the restroom in public toilets, and I'm not talking just like a public restroom. I mean, it's just a wide open space where there's a toilet on the ground, and you just
Yep.
you just have to use it. They're not given a change of clothes. They're given, like tinfoil blankets basically while sleeping on cold concrete floors. If they need medical attention, you know, if they're getting it, we're not hearing about it because it's private um, medical organizations that are being contracted to do this, and people are dying. There's a woman in Eloy, Arizona, who she was picked up incorrectly. She had no reason to get stopped or arrested. She had the proper documentation. She's been in the Eloy Detention Center for a year with no court date, no actual charges, no reason for being incarcerated, and she has leukemia. And
Mm.
her partner and Representative Yasmin Ansari and other people have gone to visit her, and they have described it as watching her slowly die because they're refusing her medical attention. They're refusing her the medication that she needs, and she is just deteriorating. It's awful.
Yeah, I know, in that same New York Times video, there was another man who was detained for being a part of a nonprofit refugee and resource allocation, um, nonprofit group, NGO, that delivers to families suffering in Egypt, and he was deemed a potential terrorist because of his ties to this nonprofit, which has been a legit operation for decades. I can't remember the exact name of it, I'd have to look it up, but, he was detained, threatened with terrorism charges, held for about 2 weeks, and then just immediately released and given his asylum status back, which is like the Trump administration's acting first and then kind of dealing with whatever consequences happen later, but nobody cares, at least in the administration, about the emotional turmoil, obviously, that causes in the people that are forced in these conditions, in these detention centers, but also the potential financial ruin. I mean, most employers are not gonna be okay with you getting
Right.
detained by ICE and saying, "Okay, we'll give you a week or 2 before you can come back." In most cases, these people are getting fired. And to
Yeah.
put people's lives in jeopardy like that and to potentially ruin their ability to house themselves, feed themselves, or provide for their families is incredibly inhumane and speaks to exactly what you're talking about. We have an Eighth Amendment for a reason. You need a
Right.
proportional response to whatever crime is committed. And when
Yeah.
most of these instances don't even involve a proven crime to begin with, how can you be able to detain somebody against their will without being able to have that probable cause?
Right. Well, I mean, that's why we're seeing all of these problems, which I would argue that the administration doesn't see it that way, and that they
Mm.
even are aware of the emotional trauma that they're causing and are encouraging it.
Yeah.
They want to cause as much pain as possible. They want to not only kick out everyone who's not white, but they want to scare everyone else from coming to the United States, and they're going to do that through inhumane torture. They're going to do it through illegal means. They're going to do it by violating the Constitution. I mean, I'm losing track, to be honest, of which constitutional amendments they haven't violated yet. I mean, they haven't instituted prohibition, so I guess we got that one.
Yeah. I mean, even the Second Amendment, which you'd think after decades and decades of whining about that, they wouldn't infringe on. But yeah, it is absolutely unacceptable what we're watching in our own country. And I think that the failures of this administration will live on throughout history. And even Donald Trump said, when he first came in, this is the era of retribution. So I think a lot of the extreme conditions that they are subjecting people to is also trying to rub in the face those who have advocated for more asylum status or an easier pathway to citizenship for a lot of these migrants. it really is retributive. That's why their social media ads are all of these highlights of torturing families and ripping them from their homes and people in clear emotional distress that they are parading in front of the audience that finally feels like they're seen, even though this does not help them materially in any way and is really just a culture war issue for people who have been so fear monger to that immigrants are the problem for their own economic disparity. It's disgusting.
Yeah. Well, and that's why it's so important that transparency is brought into this, because it's one thing to be fed a lie that immigrants are taking everything, but it's another thing to see the reality that your friends and neighbors are getting picked up and abducted by masked federal agents. And that's why it's so important that people actually get out and voice their opposition. You know, we still have that right. And in the instance of these warehouses, people have been able to effectively stop it. You know, in Salt Lake, again, there were only I would say less than 100 people outside protesting at that warehouse. But
Mm,
they knew what to do. They were there, they were loud, they called their local media affiliates, they got in the news, turned it into a big enough story that the person who owns that warehouse didn't see the advantage. They said, well, this is a lot of money because ICE is giving insane amounts of money for these warehouses, but
mhm.
it's not worth be going against my community. With Manny Akarba, he's the county legislator in Kansas City. When he got word the ICE was touring the facility in his county, he just drove out there by himself. And when the ICE agents were there, he was immediately harassed by them. He was personally afraid that they were just going to arrest him, abduct him, and throw him in, throw him in a facility.
Mm.
And so what he did was, it was really cool, because in the video of it's online, it blew up, and I think that's one of the reasons why he was able to effectively make so much change. But he stayed in his truck, and he actually called all the local news outlets and was like, hey, I'm here, ICE is harassing me, they want to turn this warehouse into a concentration camp. Everyone came, and it got so much attention that they backed off. And so, to me, these are lessons that whether you're one person or 1,000 or 1,000,000, that you can make an effective difference just by going out and joining a protest or making a phone call. It doesn't feel like much because there's 300 million people in this country, but even just chipping away at something in the slightest way, starts to make a difference.
Oh, without a doubt. And I think that the only way that people feel more comfortable going to these demonstrations is to have other loved ones that share their participation. And it can be really scary. And that's why there's a lot of federal tactics to show the force that the state is using against protesters to dissuade more people from getting out in the street. But there's always a place where you can find a community that is willing to protect you. And in most cases, there isn't a lot of retaliation. I mean, I just went to the general strike on Friday here in Los Angeles, and there were tens of thousands of people where there was no violence from law enforcement. There was just too many of us. And I think that's the important thing to emphasize as well is the more people that are in the street, the less likely there will be retaliation from local law enforcement
Yeah.
or federal agents because you just cannot control that many people. It really is such a strength in numbers strategy.
Yeah.
I saw a crazy poll. I don't know if you saw this one too. This is a poll from YouGov that says, "Would you support or oppose abolishing ICE?" And for the strongly support, 8% of Republicans are strongly support, which blew my mind kind of because we think of it
Wow.
as this like monolith. But there's 8% of Republicans out there who I guess are true to their word of limited government and don't want to see federal agents killing people in the street, and are in favor of abolishing ICE completely. This is not reform. Um,
I don't know
it
what's
is
more
wild.
surprising, that that number is so small, or that many people are willing to break with the Trump administration and say that they want to abolish ICE.
100%. I
But
mean,
I'll take it.
the biggest percentage for sure is strongly opposed. But even if you add up somewhat opposed, somewhat support, and strongly support, that's a substantial number. That's a big part of the Republican Party that's at least questioning their undying allegiance to a terror military group. And
Yeah.
it's good to see that. I mean, I know a lot of people are like, how can we, you know, get rid of the brainwashing of a large section of this country? And I think we're starting to see that. I mean, the callousness of the Trump administration is doing that themselves. They are turning people away.
Right. Well, and honestly, this is the same thing we saw during the first Trump administration, where for whatever reason, you know, people bought into the lies of a known liar, and he was able to wiggle that straddle that line enough to win his election, and then he immediately showed us that he is who he says he is and was very unpopular. And that's happening again. People said, oh, he's not going to send the military into the US cities. He's not going to initiate Project 2025. He's not going to do tariffs. Whatever the justification was for people saying he's not going to do what he says he's going to do was wrong, because now he's doing it all. And it's surprise, it's very, very, very unpopular. And so
Yeah.
even just that 8% of strongly oppose is a huge shift in just the mentality of, what used to be or is generally seen as a monolith, like you said.
And we're seeing buyer's remorse from a lot of the like podcast industry that really propped him into this position as well. And I don't know if that's necessarily because they've had a change of heart or because they recognize their audience is also questioning what did I get myself into. But I've seen Joe Rogan, Andrew Schultz, a lot of these podcasters that had Trump on and humanized him and made him seem like he's not as bad as the Democrats are criticizing him for. They are questioning why they supported this guy. And they are really shooting themselves in the foot. Like, there's no other way to say it. The Republicans are eating themselves alive, both with the schism in the Republican Party and Trump calling out very conservative people like Josh Hawley for questioning him and his unilateral control of the military, or Tom Tillis and Lisa Murkowski for criticizing Kristi Noem's incompetence. We're seeing the schism happen. And I just encourage more of it. I hope to see more Republicans detract.
The thing now is seeing if how this schism translates into electoral power. We're seeing it in the streets as more and more people are protesting, continuous protests over the past year, both long-term planned ones like 50-51 and No Kings movement, and then short immediate ones like the general strike the other day, which a general strike, personally, I would have thought would be an unheard of thing even a year ago. I remember talking to someone at the first 50-51 protest, and they were advocating for a general strike, and I was like, that would be a very effective way for things to make a difference, but I don't see it happening. And now here we are. How many thousands of people in LA and how many tens of thousands of people across the country participated in the strike? It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about, the risks that are attached, and there's a lot of risks. I mean, a lot of these businesses that are participating work on the margins. One day taking off work can be really detrimental to their long-term sustainability. But we're seeing the community come together with building mutual aid funds for those that participate in strikes. We're seeing voucher programs. I know that they started that in some areas of Minneapolis where they're operating through a voucher system. So only those that are striking are able to participate in these businesses, which is incredible. And I think that the ingenuity and the adaptability of a lot of these communities to make sure that they are in solidarity with each other is the only way that we are going to get through this. A lot of people also just talk about the benefit of identifying which businesses are going to protect their community versus which ones don't really care. And I think even if you're operating from a business mindset, let's say you don't care about the morality of making sure that people are not ripped and kidnapped from their homes, you should care about your customer base getting potentially kidnapped and sent away to God knows where, because you're losing a potential customer. Your employees could be at risk. It really is ruining communities. And I know businesses, aren't as community oriented as they are profit oriented. But even then, from a profit incentive, you should want to maximize your customer base. And part of that is ensuring that we don't have secret police that are infiltrating people's homes. It's wild.
Right. Well, I guess it's that 1% mentality again, where 1% of the business community is getting these insane multi-million dollar contracts from the Trump administration, to open up detention centers, to, do all sorts of things. They're getting these, no bid contracts. The place in Arizona, they bought that warehouse for 70 million. Another place in Maryland, they bought for 100 million. A couple guys are getting that money, but then the other 99% of businesses are suffering because they're
Yeah.
losing, they're losing employees, they're losing customers, they're losing support. And like you said, even in the most cynical, capitalistic mindset of I'm a business, I want to make money, then they should be supporting ending these sort of things. They should be supporting abolishing ICE, because that is just a financially ruinous decision to abduct a third of the country and try and kick them out of the country.
Yeah, I say it all the time. Being anti-freedom of movement and anti-migrant is purely a nationalist policy. This is not capitalist. This is not progressive. Progressives, it is obviously about the morality of not subjecting people to these harsh conditions. From a capitalist framework, you want to increase your labor pool in order to maximize economic growth. That's the only way that you can grow industries and economic productivity is by having more workers. That's just it's a one-to-one. So whatever frame set you have, you should be encouraging more migrants coming in. That is just something that we have the capability to do, and it's beneficial to us. There's no negative outcome. As you already said, there's no increase to crime. People who come here have less propensity to commit crimes than natural born citizens. We're not advocating to deport natural born citizens. Why do people get the luxury of being here just because they're born here? Because it's an idea, I guess. It's an idea that was established. There's really no basis on it besides I have the blood right in order to be here, which is such
Right.
like a medieval mentality, in my opinion. It really
Yeah.
is just nationalism. Yeah.
Well, in that, even that safety net people have in their head of, oh, well, I'm a citizen, I was born here, I'm totally fine. Like, if you're paying the slightest bit of attention, that should be eroding as well, because citizenship isn't doesn't determine what ICE is going to do to you. Renee Good, Alex Preddy, they were white American citizens and they had no
Yep.
protection under this administration. The Trump administration is also trying to get rid of birthright citizenship, and I've read through the court arguments, and I've been following what they're trying to argue before the Supreme Court. And essentially, what they're trying to do is make it so that citizenship is based on loyalty to the president of the United States. And so that anyone, regardless of how, if you're fifth generation, if your family came on the Mayflower, it doesn't matter. If you are opposed to Trump, they want to revoke your citizenship. And it starts in detention centers right now, saying, this small segment of the population is who we're attacking. You're all safe. And then we've seen it over the past year. That segment has been widening and widening until it's going to include everyone.
Yeah, I mean, they are threatening sitting U.S. congressional members. LaMonica McIver was threatened with jail time because she was protecting the mayor from being detained by ICE when she visited a detention center to check the conditions. That's her job as a congressional woman, to check that, and she's facing potential jail time. Ilhan Omar, they have been talking about denaturalizing her and deporting her. She's a sitting congresswoman. She was democratically elected by her constituents, and the Trump administration is threatening her position of power. Why? Because she's too much of a critic of the administration's policies. What type of country is it that we are allowing ourselves to operate? It is unacceptable.
And again, that's why being able to speak up now while we still have the ability to is of utmost importance. And we see that it is an effective way to stop this tide from turning. It's just a matter of keeping it up.